Until midday on 6PR, this is Gary Adshead.
It's 23 minutes to 11, and too often we hear about residents who say, oh no, we don't want any high-rise around us, or oh no, we don't want any infill around us, just leave it just the way it is. Perth can't stay that way, I'm afraid, folks. Because we need to fill in pockets of land in and around areas closer to the city so that the sprawl stops. It's that simple. So when you do, in fact, yesterday we were talking to Matt Ziss from the community newspaper group who was talking about how there was a plan at Ascot Watersway to build a lifestyle village which was high-rise, I think about 15 stories, high-rise style of lifestyle village living, but already the locals were banging the drum against that, even though there's apartments all over the place. Anyway, so with that, there is now an advocacy group for WA apartment living. It's called WA Apartment Advocacy, and to talk to the managing director is Samantha Reece. She joins me on the line. G'day, Samantha.
Hi, Gary. How are you?
Yeah, now you formed this. When did you form it, and is it because of the old NIMBYism thing, is it?
Yeah, so this week we're brand spanking new, and I guess for me, I was watching on the sideline as I saw town planning schemes and projects being rejected based on what I like to call the 0.006% of the population. And I thought to myself, if you're this angry about it, Sam, you know what? You've got to do something about it, and so I did.
Okay. Why do you think there's a big issue around apartments and so on here in Perth?
I think that people just aren't used to the idea that Perth is changing. You know, we have, over the last 2 years, become a very different type of city, haven't we? We've got Elizabeth Quay, we've got the Northbridge Link, we've now got a lot of development happening in Fremantle, the Scarborough precinct is being redone, and, Canning Bridge will be up next in terms of then that being a great little kind of like transport pocket. So, the fact is that change is happening, and some people find that fearful. Others, like myself, find it exciting. And I think that, you just can't stop change. It's going to happen anyway. Yeah,
I think the view is that it's sort of deep-seated. It's that anything that goes up is a blight on the landscape. We can cope with it when it's the CBD and we can see that skyline, and it's part of, the tourism brochures for Perth, the skyline of Perth. But anything outside the CBD, you can't have that.
So, we're seeing situations like at Wellard, for example, where there's been apartments built there, and they actually are with a shopping centre on the train line, and they actually provide accommodation for the nurses and doctors who work at Fiona Stanley Hospital. So the fact is that apartments can't just be limited to the city. They don't need to be 16 stories high. And, what we're seeing in some situations is areas where the population has stagnated or actually begun to decline. So you actually are seeing retail businesses in those locations really suffering as well. And so, for example, Fremantle, they decided to actually revitalise that CBD. They've currently got 850 people in there now living in the CBD. When they're finished, it'll be 5,000. And that is what those restaurants and those businesses need to actually keep ticking along as well. So I think it's about being strategic with your infill, strategic with your apartments, and making sure that there's actually a really good benefit for everybody in it. So
at the moment, though, do you agree that a lot of councils are just scared to go down that path, that they don't want the fight with residents?
Yeah, and I saw a speaker from North Sydney Council actually last week who talked about this, and their council had been so scared during the 1980s and 1990s to do any kind of redevelopment because they were scared of community backlash. And then what they found was that their community felt that that area was now dull and dirty.
Have you have you got evidence on who is... There are a lot of apartments that are being built around the, on the outskirts of the CBD and so forth, across at Burswood and like you said, down to South Perth, and on we go. But is there evidence about who's going in them? Because is it a misconception that it's, younger people wanting that apartment living?
So I've obviously looked at census data for certain areas, such as example, East Perth. Yep. And when we looked at from 2001 to 2013, what we actually see is a significant increase in professionals with higher incomes moving into those kinds of locations. So what you're actually finding is that, if you're paying $500,000 for a one-bedroom apartment at the Springs, for example, who can afford that? Is usually a professional company, for couple, dual income, and so what we're actually seeing is, in fact, people have got misconceptions about those 1970s kind of social housing apartments that went up in those days. But the kind of housing that's now being built is much more sophisticated, and in fact, there is a much more professional kind of person moving into them. So you actually do want to have those kinds of people as your neighbours, and what they're doing is revitalising areas that previously were a bit of an eyesore as well.
Well, you've got a big job ahead of you, I reckon. I mean, it's I think that that people sort of vote with their feet anyway, and if they want to live in apartments, they do it. But it's just changing attitude in a lot of the suburbs. I mean, Cambridge was a classic example. You probably followed that debate.
Yes.
I mean, that wasn't about apartments. That was about someone who's got 900 square metres being able to subdivide it and have a house on that they could perhaps move into that's smaller and then sell their family asset. I mean, that just got smashed.
I don't understand that kind of strategy, because really they've been part of that community for a long time. They want to stay in that community. Who are we to say that they can't? And I think that's what I want to do. I want people who live in apartments and who love apartments to come onto our website, WAAA.net.au, register with me, so that we actually have a balanced discussion and that people can actually stand up and say, hey, my vote counts just as much as your vote. You're allowed to live in a house. Why can't I live in an apartment? Why can't that choice be given to me?
All right. Well, I think it's a discussion that has to be had here in WA, because we're way behind the times on that one. Samantha, thanks very much for that.
Thank you, Gary, very much.
Samantha Reece, Managing Director of WA Apartment Advocacy. So now there's an organisation that's going out there and saying, stop being so afraid of the idea that there might be apartments near where you live.